2005 hardly seems like it was that long ago, but it was, and it was that year, in the month of March, that the first God of War game was released for the PlayStation 2. The game was set in ancient Greece, populated by a pantheon of Olympian gods, and followed the exploits of Kratos, a Spartan warrior. Defeated in battle by a barbarian king, Kratos promised to serve Ares, the god of war, if he would only provide him with the power necessary to destroy the Spartans' enemies. Ares agreed to this request, creating the series' vaunted Blades of Chaos and giving them to Kratos, who destroyed the barbarian king. As promised to Ares, Kratos fought many battles for him, but Ares made the fatal error of allowing a battle-frenzied Kratos to kill his wife and daughter by accident. With the ashes of his dead family bonded permanently to his skin, Kratos took on the nickname the Ghost of Sparta, working for the other various gods in order to rid himself of the nightmares of his mistake. At the behest of Athena, Kratos eventually kills Ares and takes Ares' empty throne, fully embracing and becoming the titular god of war. Since then, there have been numerous games across a plethora of consoles, though generally Sony consoles and handhelds. We could further explain the rest of the games leading up to today's reviewed game, God of War, released in 2018, not the one released in 2005, but we'd be here all day. What you do need to know is that Kratos eventually, over the course of 2 more games, kills the entire pantheon of gods, and with his job complete, disappears into the unknown. Now, many years later, Kratos finds himself with a son, Atreus, in the Frost of Midgard, and faced with a new pantheon of gods, hell-bent on destroying him and his son, as they seek to spread the ashes of Kratos' second wife, Faye, from the realm's highest mountain. God of War 3, the last game timeline-wise, released in 2010, which means that we had to wait 8 long years to find out what exactly happened to Kratos. The break was worth it in my opinion, even if us superior PC users had to wait 4 long years for it to release on PC. But thanks for beta testing, PlayStation. Man, that took a while, but we're here at the actual review now. Probably one of the most notable aspects of God of War is that it plays considerably different from the previous games in the series. Most of the previous games had a third-person camera that was centered on Kratos but pulled back considerably, adding a sense of epic scale to combat and the overall game itself. In this version, gameplay takes place from a third-person perspective over the shoulder. As a result, much of the game's sense of scale often has to be demonstrated through its many cutscenes. Another aspect common to previous games are QuickTime events, but the 2018 version almost completely lacks such things, in lieu of button-mashing challenges aplenty. One could argue that that's preferable to QTEs, but previous entries in the series had an issue with having far too many QuickTime events. Lacking them here is fine, but it would have been okay to throw 1 or 2 in for old time's sake. All things in moderation, as they say. Beyond those 2 things, God of War still manages to retain the spirit of its predecessors, thanks to its often gory but smooth combat. The greater focus on story is also a nice, welcome change of pace, but it causes that pace to be much slower. It's not quite as breakneck as its ancestors, but it moves along quickly enough that you won't find yourself bored. In combat, you're helped by Kratos' son, Atreus, who will choke enemies, pelt them with arrows of various types, and utilize runic spells. At first, controlling Atreus in a way that's conducive to what you're doing in combat can be a bit of a challenge, but it shouldn't take you too long to start weaving in the button presses required to pelt enemies with volleys of magically explosive arrows. This game focuses more on the RPG aspects of action RPG compared to its predecessors. There's more of an emphasis on equipping new armors and talismans, socketing enhancements, and upgrading your weapons. You also earn experience points used to upgrade skills and unlock new attacks and abilities for both Kratos and Atreus, incentivizing going out of your way to pick up collectibles, or doing favors and side quests for more EXP and goodies. It can be a bit of a learning curve to start weaving in a lot of your new attacks and abilities into your current combat style, but ultimately these are things you'll have to learn as enemies become increasingly smarter and more capable of defending themselves. The story is also quite nice, and the characters, with the notable exception of Atreus for the bulk of the game, are memorable, and the game does a really good job of making you give a shit about those characters. There's also not a ton of characters here either, the developers having embraced a less is more philosophy here. The important characters crop up often enough and don't overstay their welcome. The unimportant characters remain as long as they're needed and rarely linger. More developers can learn from this sort of design philosophy, in my opinion. too many characters, and it feels like they're just throwing them at the wall to see what sticks. In terms of graphics, this game looks spectacular for a PC port of a console game, and the developers did a pretty solid job of ensuring that things didn't look similar. There's aesthetics common to each realm that you go to, but you spend most of your time in Midgard, which is rocky and snowy. Traveling to other realms is a nice change of pace, as they all look remarkably different from Midgard. The music on offer here is solid as well, though I did have the issue of not even realizing it was playing a lot of the time. Much of the time, the game is quiet, content to simply fill your ears with the soothing sounds of nature. Anytime music actually plays, typically during cutscenes or combat, I was often focused on other things, and it made it hard to really assess what sort of tunes or the quality of tunes that God of War had. So while God of War looks great, sounds good, and plays well, there are a few gripes I had with it that keeps it from being a masterpiece in my opinion. For example, the game feels like it ends abruptly and in an unsatisfactory manner. While we've already discussed the contradictory nature of this God of War to previous games, finishing up with an epic fight would have truly been in the spirit of the series. Instead, Kratos and Atreus lay down, the credits roll, and we get a Marvel-esque post-credits scene teasing the upcoming sequel, God of War Ragnarok. Another issue I took with the game is that it takes quite a while for enemies to get to a point where just throwing your axe at them isn't an effective strategy. Later on you encounter enemies that are able to block your axe throws, but even then it doesn't take much to cheese them. Most combat encounters for the first half of the game unfold the same way. You kite enemies while headshotting them with axe throws, or hitting their legs so they'll fall over and make easier targets. This is exacerbated later on by enemies that knock you out of combos if they go on for too long, which is extremely frustrating to me. Additionally, there are a number of enemies that require you to hit them with arrows before they become vulnerable. Not having a way to handle these enemies with Kratos alone feels like the game is forcing me to use Atreus, which is not okay in my opinion, but I understand the logic there. Last but not least, the game's side quests are extremely tedious, requiring you to sink many hours into the game just to get some of the best equipment it has to offer or to track down collectibles that you might have missed. I was extremely thorough with this game and even retraced old areas and couldn't find various collectibles I missed the first time through. It got to the point where I got bored and just moved on, but if you're the kind of person who loves to 100% your games, I strongly suggest a walkthrough for collectibles. Overall, God of War is a solid game with combat that flows smoothly with a solid but linear story, and the port is excellent, especially if you've got a good gaming rig. However, you can feasibly run this game on mid-power rigs and still do fairly well, and best of all, as of this review, the game is still getting patched and optimized. It's nice to see that they didn't just drop the game on Steam and run away while waiting for profits to roll in, so thumbs up there. As of this review, God of War is $50 and hasn't yet deviated from that price point, which is no surprise this soon off, but it should come down in price eventually. While I'm not sure I agree with a $50 game here, regardless of how well optimized and better looking the port is, anything $40 or less is probably what I would consider a fair price point for what's here. Thanks for hanging out today. If you want more Chunky Beef, drop a like and be sure to subscribe or follow us on Twitter, link in the description below. See you soon.